DC. Well, talking about Donald Trump, we've heard more sharp rhetoric from him on Iran. He says any country or business which fails to comply with US sanctions on Iran will face severe consequences. The president was chairing the UN Security Council today, and he very much used that chance to push this Iran message.
The Iranian regime exports violence, terror, and turmoil. It illicitly procures sensitive items to advance its ballistic missile program and proliferates these missiles all across the Middle East. The regime is the world's leading sponsor of terror and fuels conflict across the region and far beyond.
Well, Iran isn't a current member of the Security Council, so it wasn't represented, but the support that it received inside the Council was noted by President Rouhani.
Today in the UN Security Council, it became clear that America is alone. All the countries that spoke in the UN Security Council supported the JCPOA. This doesn't mean that today we are not experiencing the pressures that the United States is exerting on nations, but always the Iranian government has been in positions that are much tougher. With its unity and with its positions and with its resistance has been able to surpass such difficulties in the past, just as it will do so today.
Well, let's get two perspectives now from the United Nations with the help of Barman Kalbasi from BBC Persian joining us live, but also Barbara Usher, the BBC's State Department correspondent. Hi, Barbara. We expected these two countries to be rude about each other, but how much support did Iran get within the Security Council? Barbara, can you hear me okay?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was just saying, clearly we expected Iran and the US to be quite rude about each other, but what support did Iran get inside the Security Council?
Well, it got the support that has been there all along, which is that the Security Council backs the Iran nuclear deal, did so in a UN resolution, and sees Donald Trump and America as the outlier for having pulled out of it. So that was said in various ways, sometimes more sharply, like the French president, sometimes less so, just council members saying that they were still committed to it and they still thought that it was the best way to go forward. The Western nations in particular also mentioned that they had similar concerns to Mr. Trump in terms of what they call Iran's destabilizing activity in the region, but they wanted to address it within the framework of the Iran nuclear deal, not outside it.
Stay with us, please, Barbara. Barman, let's bring you in. It was interesting to hear President Rouhani say he acknowledged the consequences of this US pressure, that it's having an impact on Iran.
Well, because people in Iran are feeling it every day. The crash of currency is not just the mismanagement of the economy by the Iranian government. It is a major factor in it is the fact that the capital flight we've seen in the last few months have been enormous in fear of these sanctions that are coming on. Iranian people, middle class, lower classes, are extremely under pressure because of these sanctions, and things are probably going to get a lot worse before there is a change again. So the reality is any president of Iran at this point has to acknowledge that these sanctions have an impact on the lives of Iranians. But so far we haven't seen any impact on the behavior of the Iranian government, as the US government was hoping or is hoping it will achieve. And the reality is he is now walking away from this three-day trip, President Rouhani, that is going back to Iran and saying, I managed to show the world that the one that is violated the deal, the one that is the rogue state, is the United States, not Iran, because everybody else acknowledges that this deal is important and should stay on, and point to the IAEA's verification of Iran's compliance, not just Europeans, even Kuwait, which is closer to Saudi than it is to Iran. Everybody in that council pointed that fact out, and that is a political victory and a diplomatic victory. But the reality is, despite whatever happens here, the power of U.S. economic sanctions has real-life consequences for many millions of Iranians who were hoping things will get better, and with the election of Donald Trump, it's all going backwards again.
Barman, thank you very much indeed. Barbara, let me just ask you, do you think the Americans went into this UN General Assembly with the expectation that they could persuade others to walk away from the nuclear deal?
I don't know that they were expecting concrete results in terms of that, but they definitely wanted to try to change the narrative away from the nuclear deal and towards Iran's behavior, its missile production, its support for proxies in the region, in Yemen and Syria. And they wanted to try to highlight that and also to get some support around that. And initially, they were planning to do that in a very strong way by making the UN Security Council meeting all about Iran, but I think administration officials decided that that wouldn't be a good idea, not only because Iran would then also need to be invited, but because then the issue on which the Security Council is split would just be focused on Mr. Trump. And this way, with other topics, he could be praised for his initiative in North Korea, and he could. There were also accusations against Russia for supporting chemical weapons attacks via the Syrians. So it diluted it somewhat. But I can't imagine they didn't think that they would get this kind of response from the Security Council.
Barbara, good to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed. Barman from BBC Persian, thank you to you as well. Both Barman and Barbara joining us live from the UN General Assembly.